Worship, we have no late items to add to our agenda tonight.
Thank you. Can I get a motion to adopt the agenda as circulated? Grace, Mr. Mattis, call the question. In favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Moving to adoption of prior minutes. We got lots of them. E1, November 12th, 2019, public hearing, zoning bylaw 1380.1 and OCP bylaw amendment 1370.02. Get a motion to adopt those minutes. Councilor Schwarzenberger, second by Councilor Rice. Call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Second one, November 12th, 2019, public hearing, zoning amendment bylaw 1380.11. So moved. Second, Councilor Rice. Call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Item 3, November 12th, 2019, regular open council meeting minutes. Make a motion to adopt those. Rice. Second by Councilor Schwarzenberger. Call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Item 4, November 13th, 2019, special open meeting minutes. Mover to adopt those minutes. Councilor Mattis, second by Councilor Rice. Call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Item 5, November 13th, 2019, special open budget deliberation meeting minutes. Mover for those. Councilor Rice, second Councilor Mattis. Call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. And the last meeting minutes, November 18th, 2019, inter-council meeting minutes. Can I get a motion? Councilor Mattis, second by Councilor Rice. Call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Committee reports. Can I get a motion to receive November 6th, 2019, Food Action Advisory Committee meeting minutes? Councilor Rice, second by Councilor Schwarzenberger. Any comments, questions, or call the question? Call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. And the second set of committee meeting minutes to receive, November 12th, 2019, Committee of the Whole meeting minutes. Moved by Councilor Schwarzenberger, second by Councilor Rice. Call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Moving to water matters, 2020 Water Rates Amendment Bylaw.
Worship, we have a slight issue with regards to the bylaws under the water matters. I'm actually just texting Councillor Bentamina to see if she can come in by a conference call.
Oh, okay.
Okay, because we need everybody here.
Okay.
But we could go on to the, no, they're all for water, so we might be able to go to the policy.
The council communication policy.
Yes.
Okay, well, let's do that while we're waiting. Council communication policy. Refer to the CA.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm going to pass this over to our corporate officer to put you through this particular report.
Thank you, Your Worship. Let's see if it was on. I have before you this evening, it's a report to introduce a new council communication policy. As a little bit of a background, in my 2019 work plan, it included a review of communication policies. What was in the communication or the policy manual are the communication policy, which is a council policy, and it came into effect in September 21st, 2009, and was amended in March 26, 2012. There's also 2 administrative policies that included communication-related guidelines, which was called correspondence routing and mail routing. Reviewing the 3 policies together, what I have before you is a new council communication policy that just speaks to council and receiving communications from your citizens, and to remove all the administrative functions, including the correspondence routing and mail routing, into administrative policy. a draft policy is attached to this report for your review. And what I've done is I've highlighted the administrative provisions with a yellow highlight and just with red wording saying council related provisions that have gone into, for the most part, into the new communication policy. So the options before council are to adopt the policy as presented. You may refer back to staff for additional changes, or you may not wish to adopt the council communication policy at this time. The policy speaks to information that council would receive from its citizens that are operational in nature and process. And for councilor members, which include mayor and council and water councilors, who receive requests for information that are operational or technical, they should be forwarded to the chief administrative officer for response. She may fan it out to her directors or her senior staff for review. Staff will review those requests for information following the administrative policy. And include it in a copy all of council so they would get that information, they would know that the response has been followed up on. Requests that are non-operational in nature, that are related specifically to council, the community charter outlines responsibilities for the mayor, and that the mayor has the responsibility to communicate and to carry out the duties on behalf of council. So with that in mind, the mayor would present the official position of council, and that response would be on our official letterhead or an email. And then again, included in the CRF for council's information. If council members receive requests for a policy position on the issue, and the issue has come before council resulting in a resolution, the council member would provide that official sense of the town, would be able to provide their own position on that issue, and it's asked that that response is shared with all of council and the CAO so they have an understanding of what's been communicated. And as well, electronic mail for mayor and council. All of Town of Oliver email accounts are records of the town and subject to the Freedom of Information and Protection Privacy Act. If you wish, we can go through the old policy, or if I can just take questions if you like at this time.
Councilor Price.
Thank you, Richard. So just in case anyone wants to follow on our page 7 under procedures, I just had a question. Didn't necessarily agree with the point about materials being disregarded without further notice. One of those being requests for council proclamations. I don't know if there's a policy behind that, or maybe just
Through the chair,
necessarily
currently there is a separate policy that council does not issue proclamations. So that's why that's in that administrative policy. So that would be a separate policy that would have to be brought forward for council to reconsider.
So if I could follow up, that'd be something I'd be interested in seeing revisited, and I would, and even if council didn't necessarily want to or keep the policy the way it is, I'd still like to see those come to council.
Through the chair, so those could be just included in the CRF, so then you would have awareness of requests for proclamations, absolutely, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Richard.
Councilor Mattis.
I had a few questions regarding the whole setup. On page 6 at the top, item 7B7, non-management staff should not provide or seek information or advice to or from council members except as directed by management staff. I can understand that during working hours, but they are tax-paying citizens the same as everyone else, and certainly should be open to approaching council whenever they, and on whatever topic they may choose.
Sorry, I don't know which provision that was, on which
I'm on
page?
your page 6, like the written, on mine it would be
Okay.
page 11 of 14 on the computer.
That's the old one, that's the current one.
That's the current policy, so that's the way it
So where am I
Current
looking at
stands.
current versus,
The current one is, on your iPad, pages 4 and 5, that would be the new one.
that's the whole policy, 4 and 5?
Yes, yes. And then the pages 6 through 14, that's the existing policy, and sections of that would be moved into council's policy or into an administrative policy.
And I don't have any questions.
Yeah, the point is not to, remove, you know, the provisions that are in the old policy, it's more to create it, recreate it as an administrative policy, to take it out of council. So I don't wanna lose any of the policies or the guidelines that are in there, I wanna change it to an administrative policy, so how we're handling your mail administratively. So nothing gets, lost and you're not losing communication.
So, let me get this correct, the council policy is 4 and 5, but then from 6 onward is administration policy? And
Sorry.
we're enacting those as policies tonight, or I'm confused as to what I'm looking at here, to be honest with you.
CAO.
Thank you, Your Worship. What is included in this is the current policy, which is the one that has red markings on it and highlighting. And then the draft policy that is being proposed for council to adopt is the page 4 and 5.
So
So
we're-
the second, the current policy was just placed on there for information, so that you could see where we're working on removing the administrative section of communication from the council section, so that it's more an administrative policy over a governance policy when it comes to the communication.
Yeah, so the discussion tonight is basically on the council policy and not on the administrative policy that will be coming to council at a later date, if I'm understanding.
Well, the administrative policy will be an administrative policy per se, it wouldn't be a council policy, so it'd be put in by myself, following what's outlined in your council communication. We're just looking at council communication right now. And then administrative policies are done usually by administration.
You understand that, but I have concerns with what's in the administrative policy at this point, to be honest with you.
And so do I.
Okay. And that's why I'm asking if that will come back before council at some point, in case the concerns remain.
We will provide it for your review. It's not a policy, administrative policies do not have to be adopted by council. It's not a council policy per se, it's an administrative directive.
As long as I have a commitment that it'll come back, then I'll see you again, I'm fine with that. And I understand that it is an administrative policy, but when it affects the conduct of council and the communications of council with staff or others, then I view that as council policy.
CAO.
Thank you, Your Worship. With respect to communication with staff, it's also in your code of conduct. It has been identified in code of conduct as to some discussions, et cetera. So, we're looking at providing an updated communication policy, because this one was adopted back in 2009. And so, it's changed slightly since then, and, we wanna just make sure that it's up to date. And we can show it to you through your reader's file as to those particular, changes that we do to our administrative policies.
So we're just looking at the 2-page council communication policy.
That's correct, the ones that have the draft, watermark on them.
Yes, Councillor Grace, what was the proclamation?
That was on our page.
That's in the administrative
That is in
policy.
the administrative policy, but that's on our page 7.
But it's actually a council policy. This is what I'm concerned about. There's administrative policies intermixed with council policies, intermixed with code of conduct. And I'm concerned that staff is writing up policies that need council approval or that involve council, and whether council buys into those policies or not. And I think it's very important that we have the opportunity at a committee of the whole meeting to vet those policies before they are put into place, especially when they involve council. I don't have an issue with the first 2 pages of the report that say draft on them whatsoever. That makes perfect sense to have that policy. But if you're gonna put a new policy in place, that means that you rescind the previous policy. And if that current policy is the second part, then you can't have the new without getting rid of the old. And if staff isn't ready to do that, then maybe it needs to come back at a committee of the whole or at another time.
Councillor Grace?
Thank you, Your Worship. Through to the, I guess, corporate officer. So assuming you're revamping the council policy, then I assume the administrative policy is being revamped as well?
That's in progress right now. It would be like a correspondence policy. It's how correspondence is managed within the town. And that's like the mail routing, the correspondence routing, the communication, council staff communications, that's currently in council's code of conduct policy. So I've made the comment that I says those specific items all need to be determined where they should be because they're already identified in the code of conduct policy. They probably don't even need to be included in this. They don't, these policies are intertwined and they don't make sense. So that's why some things just need to come out.
Be separated.
Right, and then with the proclamation, it's kind of listed in here, but it's also, council also has a policy that speaks to, that Oliver Council does not issue proclamations.
Which is why it's in the.
That's right, so, yeah, so my intent is to bring back, at upcoming COW meetings, 4 or 5 policies, and I'll try to bring those ones that are all kind of melded together, and we can look at them and say, should we be keeping this one, should we be removing this one? Should we be combining it to make it one? Yeah, I think that would make more sense.
So is it
with
fair
those-
then, if the administrative policy does come back to us in the CRF and we have concerns, we can request that it come to a COW meeting for?
Then it wouldn't be administrative policy, that's, we're not going to, administratively, we don't want to, harm any correspondence that is coming to you. But what I could do is bring it back and with some of these things, like these ones about the lines of authority and information requests to mayor and council, I could advise that those are in your code of conduct, you already have those provisions, they don't need to be in the correspondence, policy, it doesn't make sense. But I could do a little graph or whatever and clarify that.
I guess just trying to, if I don't wanna speak for Councillor Matos, but just to speak to his concerns, maybe just to be able to, if we look at the new administrative policy, to be able to identify if council feels that there are perhaps council policy issues in there that perhaps didn't get separated out, just for an opportunity to look at that.
Yeah, you can look at that.
Not to micromanage
Yeah,
staff.
okay, yeah, cause it's just really all of, what I'm trying to do is to identify correspondence related items. This is communications, it's not really correspondence. That helps.
Okay. Are you okay with that, Councillor Madison?
Yeah, I think they've made the commitment that it will come back at committee of the whole, as I've, aside from this, I've voiced many times that we should be looking at our whole policy manual. In fact, if council hasn't seen it, I would ask staff to copy in all of council on all of our council policies. And, it should be reviewed, that should be a committee of the whole meeting, and that's where that proclamation policy falls. if it doesn't come before the committee of the whole, or at some point, it'll just continue to get pushed off. And I think it's something that that every council should early in their term is review the policies of the previous council. I think we're at that point.
Councillor Rice.
Thank you, Rachel. I would support that request as well. Kind of need all their benefits to review policies. They come up time to time again that are a surprise to me, so nice to see what's in there. I don't know if we need a motion to have our policy review brought to a CAM meeting.
We can just copy us in at this point.
CEO.
Thank you, Your Worship. That is part of the strategic planning, that was identified. And I do recall having a conversation with council, during orientation that, it is good practice to go through all of the, policies as it's a new council. So it will be brought forward, and it might be at a strategic planning session over a committee of the whole meeting.
Okay. Councillor Mattis.
I would ask for it sooner than that, simply on the basis of we're already a year into the term. If it was recommended at our last strategy session that this be done, and it's a year later, we should be doing it. I don't think there's any, putting it off and delaying and coming up with this and that. It's a year later, and no one, other than myself on this council, has ever seen that policy manual, I guarantee it. And it's time.
CEO.
Thank you, Worship. I do believe there is a copy of the policy manual sitting in the council, in the council office, but, I respect what's being asked, and we will make sure that it comes to a committee of the whole meeting.
Thank you. Then we have that commitment to look at the administrative policy as it gets updated, and the policies for the town of Oliver will come in a committee of the whole meeting. Looking at the council policy, the communication policy that's before us, do we have a mover? Or are there any further discussion or questions?
I will move adoption of the policy.
Move adoption of the draft policy.
Second.
Second by Councilor Schwarzenberger. Any further questions? Comments? I'll call the question, and those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you, Worship. I have been able to get in touch with Councillor Bentamila, and I'm just gonna bring her in on the phone for
Okay.
the water bylaws. Go louder.
Hello, Petra speaking.
Hi, Councillor Bentamila. I've just brought you into the meeting so that we can do the water bylaws.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry about the hiccup.
That's okay.
No worries. Then we'll go right away to item 1, 2020 Water Rates Amendment Bylaw. Pass it over to the CEO.
Thank you, Your Worship. I will pass this over to Mr. Leahy, our CFO, to bring you through the report and the bylaw itself.
Thank you, Your Worship. The bylaw is the Water Rates Amendment Bylaw 1351.06. It is a result of our budget discussions that took place on November the 13th. The bylaw proposes a 4% rate increase and it's broken down as 2% for the operations portion of the budget and 2% for the canal/Gallagher siphon repairs. As such, the staff are recommending that the bylaw proceed to 3 readings tonight, and there was one amendment at that meeting It was a minor amendment, and that was to move one operating item to capital in the amount of $19,000. That was two pumps at the Miller Road pump station. And with that, as I indicated, the recommended motion is that Water Regulation Amendment Bylaw 1351.06 be read a first, second, and third time. Thank you, Worship.
Any questions, discussion? Can I get a mover then? Moved by Councilor Michelle, second by Councilor Sadoo. Any further discussion, questions? Call the question, those in favor? Opposed, motion carried.
I'm in favor.
Okay, thank you, Councilor.
Thank you.
Benjamin.
Moving to item 2, Gallagher Lake Water Siphon Loan Authorization Bylaw, referred to the CEO.
Thank you, Your Worship. I will again pass this over to our Chief Financial Officer to bring you through his report.
Thank you, Your Worship. This staff report is to introduce a loan authorization bylaw for the Gallagher Lake water siphon project, and the project itself is estimated to be $11.48 million, of which $5 million is provincial grant monies that have been committed to from the province to the town of Oliver. Therefore, the loan authorization bylaw is going to be in the maximum amount of $6.48 million. The amortization period, as my report indicates, is a maximum of 25 years. It is estimated at this point in time, with the information that we know presently, is that approximately the water rates will increase 14% due to, and it's going to be the debt servicing is with the current interest rates that the town of Oliver can borrow from the Municipal Finance Authority will be in the neighborhood of $385,000 annual debt servicing. I do want to caution council, however, that is considered to be the maximum amount that we will be borrowing, as once the project gets tendered, once we get to know some of the costs that are hopefully are going to come in under budget, and it's going to be a 20-month construction time period, we will be reviewing our reserve, water capital reserve, also our user fees, and any other possible revenue streams that we have to limit that loan authorization amount down from the 6.48, hopefully to certainly come in under 6 million and hopefully even less than 5 million, but I don't want to get too optimistic. So this is why we're borrowing the 6.48. It's also, we must adopt this bylaw. The province has put forth that until we adopt this bylaw, the province will not forward their share of the money, and that's $5 million. So with that, I'm recommending that the council authorized loan authorization bylaw 1391 be read a first, second, and third time. Thank you, Your Worship.
Councilor Michelle?
Just have one question. Once we authorize this, at what point do we get the $5 million? In other words, if we could get it early in the deal, we wouldn't have to do so much temporary boring. So I wonder how that mechanism is going to work. Once we prove to the province that we passed this bylaw today, we're on board and we're going to borrow that up to that $6 million. When would we actually get the money from the province?
I'll start, Your Worship, then I know the CAO is going to also join in. We're having a discussion tomorrow with the ministry staff in regards to exactly the mechanism, and I can tell you that by taking this bylaw to 3 readings, we still, and we don't need assent. That's another thing, because it was when the original order in council from the South Okanagan Land Improvement District. But it does have to be approved by the Inspector of Municipalities, which is the province, so it's going to come back here, I don't know, maybe in January, maybe February, whenever that happens. But by at least taking it to this 3rd reading, we will now start that process. So hopefully tomorrow we will have some more feedback as to the mechanism, because that was my question exactly, was, okay, now that we're going to do this, how do we get this money? Because usually in my history, usually not carte blanche, usually it's a matching or et cetera, so we're gonna find out more tomorrow.
He answered it.
Okay. Councillor Bryce, you have a
Oh,
question?
thank you, Worship. Through to the CFO, so if we do come in under budget, does the bylaw need to be amended? Do we have to go through this process again, or?
No, what will happen is simply, we're not gonna borrow, and the very next item on your agenda is our temporary borrowing bylaw. We're not gonna borrow any more money than we have to, and that's where the temporary borrowing bylaw kicks in. It's basically a letter of credit, or I shouldn't say letter of credit, it's a line of credit. And so we will use that as our cash flow, as our working capital for, during this project. And at such time as where we know our final costs are getting very close to that, then we'll take that and we'll roll it into long-term debt. So the bylaw itself is our maximum amount. Now, if all our tenders, worst case scenario, come in over that, then we're gonna have to rethink this whole process. And so this will come back before council.
Thank you.
Councillor Michelle?
What is the interest rate? Do you know what it is?
Right now, the MFA was issuing 10-year debt at about 2.56%, 2.6%. Now that obviously is gonna change by the time we go to market, but it's been pretty steady around that amount for the last 2-3 years, very reasonable.
For 10 year?
For 10 years, they only go 10 years, and then they renew, they refinance every 10 years. So in the 10 years from now, in 2029, we'll be refinancing whatever we borrow.
That's good.
Okay, so moved.
So moved. We have a seconder. Second, Councillor Grace. Any further discussion? Call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Councillor Ventimila?
Oh, sorry, I'm in favor.
Thank you.
One more.
Passes. One more, item
Don't
3.
hang up yet.
Okay.
Gallagher Lake Water Cycle Temporary Borrowing Bylaw. Pass it over to the CAO.
Thank you, Worship. Mr. Leahy had sort of touched lightly on this particular bylaw, so I'll let him continue on with explaining it completely to you.
Thank you, Your Worship. As I indicated in my previous discussion, I'm not gonna add a lot more to it, but the process is that we will be using a temporary borrowing bylaw for capital purpose, and we will borrow from the Municipal Finance Authority until we do know our final costs, or we're getting close to that final process. And what we will do at that point in time, like I indicated previously, when we get to know closer to our final costs, we will then be rolling that into our long-term financing. So MFA has a very, very inexpensive interest rate. It's cheaper than the long-term financing. I believe it's about 1.9% right now. So it's a very good way to borrow money for a long-term capital project. So the recommendation is that the temporary borrowing bylaw 1392 be read a first, second, and third time.
Councillor Mattis?
I'll move the recommendation.
So moved. Second, Councillor Michelle. Any further questions? Call the question. Those in favor?
I'm in favor.
None opposed. Unanimous. Carried. Moving to development cost charge reductions for affordable housing. I'll refer to the CEO. Are we done? Good, good, good.
Somebody wanna
Yeah.
talk?
Possibly.
Councillor Ventimila, we are done with those water matters. Would you like to continue in on the conversation, or would you like to go?
I'm gonna sign off if that's all right.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, guys.
Yeah, bye-bye.
There's dedication.
Director Wu?
Alright, thank you, Your Worship. So development cost charges. So development cost charges are paid by a developer through the creation of new parcels via subdivision and during construction through multifamily, industrial, or commercial buildings. The purpose of DCCs are to assist local governments in the capital costs associated with providing, constructing, altering, or expanding sewage, water, drainage, and highway facilities, as well as providing and improving parkland. The affordable housing project at 5931 Airport Street is requesting a waiving or reduction of the $225,000 DCCs payable at time of building permit issuance. The current DCC bylaw, number 1172, does not have provisions for waiving or reducing DCCs for affordable housing buildings or any of the eligible developments listed in section 563 of the community charter. The town of Oliver is in the process of drafting a new DCC bylaw, but this isn't anticipated to be in effect until mid to late next year, and the affordable housing project will probably get a building permit in early next year, so hence the reason for asking council's opinion and appetite for reducing DCCs for affordable housing at this time. So as mentioned, staff are seeking council's direction on the appetite for reducing or waiving DCCs, which will in turn give the BC Housing Project team some further comfort in their budgeting process. Staff will work on the details of the bylaw amendment based on the recommendation from council. Staff are recommending amendments to the DCC bylaw to include provisions for reducing DCCs by 50% for non-profit housing or for-profit affordable rental housing projects, as long as there's a housing agreement registered on title. Typically, these housing agreements are in favor of the town, and they ensure that the form of tenure of the housing units are limited to rental. It also, there's provisions that it needs to be for at least 20 years. And it also, the housing agreement will typically say that rents are less than the median market rent values most recently published by the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation. Staff considered that a 50% reduction is a win-win and that it assists and encourages necessary affordable housing projects in our community while also continuing to provide funding for future capital projects. So I can add a little bit more information. I did some research today. So some of the smaller municipalities in our area, such as Summerland, Peachland, Oseas, do not have provisions for reducing DCCs for affordable housing projects. Vernon and Penticton, similar size, they do have provisions, and it could be up to 100% reduction. Kelowna and Kamloops have they have grants that they can help support these projects, and also reserve funds that they can help support them. But yeah, Penticton and Vernon are really the only ones that do 100% reductions for DCCs for affordable housing. So that's a bit of a background on that. Yeah, so with that, the staff recommendation is that 50% reduction for DCCs for these types of projects as long as as long as the housing agreement's registered on title. But as I mentioned at this time, it's just staff are looking for council's direction on it. So it's not necessarily a bylaw amendment, because if we go forward with this, the DCC bylaw will have to be amended, which is a bit of a process in itself. Thank you, Your Worship.
Councilman Shaw.
What are there water DCCs that are involved? I'm just wondering why it's in water.
Yeah, water, yeah.
So the water DCC portion, how much would it be on a $200,000 job?
Find that out for you in a second here.
Yeah, okay.
So typically, multifamily one is $600 of the, so 10% approximately. So 25,000 would be water DCCs.
The other
25,000 of the 225,000. Yeah.
The other question I would have was, I'm just curious if, because these are all, there's deals with the provincial government, these people to build these. I'm just wondering if the town of Oliver reduces, it just means that the provincial government will kick that portion in, and really what you're saving is the provincial government the money. Because these people have formulas and to build these, and I would hate to think that the town of Oliver is actually subsidizing the provincial government, because that money might very well be there. That's how they built these things. That's why they're affordable. And it's interesting that other communities of our size don't have this provision. So I'd be a little bit concerned about that we'd actually be helping the provincial government not kick as much money into the projects.
Councilor Madison.
A couple of questions, or not questions, but concerns for me on this is I don't at this point support it, not that my mind can't be changed. But within the agreement, there's nothing here that says, and I don't know how the town would ever verify, when I read this agreement would require that housing units be rented for an initial monthly rate that is less than median market rent levels. That would change with a new tenant. We have no way of verifying that. And I'm sure that could all be written into the agreement, but it's more administration for the town. That's a very small piece of it. The concern for me is until we rewrite our DCC bylaw, we will not know whether our DCC projects are currently funded properly. And as a result, if we lower this, we won't know, we may have to increase the DCCs on other projects in order to make this up. So it would actually be a double penalty to some other projects down the road until we actually do that review. The other concern that I have with this is that in this particular situation, the building is being built in a partnership with two developers, Ellis Don and the Nicola Development Corporation, in conjunction with the provincial government. Those development corporations will benefit from this. After it is built, it will be handed off to a nonprofit housing society. That nonprofit housing society will not benefit from this. The benefit of doing this will only flow to the developer at the start. It will not flow to the end user, and that's a real concern for me. Again, to me, even though the Local Government Act allows us, under this circumstance, to give a subsidy to a business or a nonprofit, in this case, it's not a nonprofit that's building the building and getting the benefit. It's actually Ellis Don Corporation. It's a nonprofit that is operating the building, but it's not a nonprofit that is asking for the reduction. And it's only not-for-profit housing is eligible. So there's clarification in there, but as I say, the benefit flows to the developer. It doesn't flow to the end user or to the nonprofit society that will operate the building. And I don't think that we should be doing a subsidy to those people.
Councilor Bryce.
Thank you, Worship. So obviously I've been a proponent for nonprofit, affordable housing. Quite a few thoughts here. Just to comment on what Councillor Mattis said, Macola Housing has a development side and then it's two divisions of the same company. So the not-for-profit side that's going to manage the project, as far as I understand. There's the development side that's going to build it, and then there's the not-profit side that's going to run it, but it's basically the same company. So I mean, benefit to.
Two companies.
Can we get a clarification on that?
Thank you, Worship. Yeah, there's Macola Development Services, and then there's Macola Housing Corporation, I believe, and yeah, it's the not-for-profit society that'll be running this project. It is separate from their development side.
So I guess my comment then on developers benefiting from DCC reduction is it does benefit the community at the end of the day if it attracts more more affordable housing projects to be built. I mean, developers need to make money at the end of the day. It's going to attract them to build more affordable housing, and I think that's important. I mean, I had some concerns in here as well with some of the wording, and I think some things need to be sort of qualified and tightened up a little bit before we could just go ahead with maybe this type of reduction.
Councilor Swartzberg.
Thank you, Worship. Through to the Director of Development Services. Some of the discussions I've heard with Macola Development, or one of the Macola divisions, was the cost to build somehow affected the subsidy. Do you know anything about that? Is the cost to build tied somehow to the subsidies? Because when they turn it over, they're turning it over at so many dollars per unit, and then it's being subsidized by the government to make it and run by a nonprofit. So the question is, if the project is 4.8 million instead of 5 million, does that affect the subsidies for the rental units?
Thank you, Worship. Truthfully, I'm not sure about the subsidy question. I do know that from what the developers are telling us, that if council is agreeable to waiving some of the DCCs, then it'll help lower the rents. That's what I've been told.
So that was my point.
So the decision you're making is, from what they're saying, is that it's impacting the rents.
Okay.
Yeah.
And my other point was that council, not through DCCs necessarily, but through tax exemption, gives an incentive to people to come forward and build things in the town that we want, like a hotel or development downtown on Main Street, those type of things, and they get 5 to 10 year tax exemptions. Affordable housing is something that our council has, been wanting for this town, and I see this reduction. Now we can decide on the amount of the reduction, but I see this just the same as a tax, waiving the taxes for 10 years so that we got a hotel, or waiving the taxes for 10 years so we get new development on Main Street.
That really wasn't a question, so just.
That was me saying what I thought.
I have a question, and I know Councilor Mattis has a question, but I will, CFO, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I didn't want to interrupt. I did.
It's okay, I rambled.
No, that's okay. I did want to respond to that, just so council's aware. If this falls under the category of the Assessment Act, which I believe it does, because I checked this with my counterparts in Penticton, it will be other affordable housing class, which means it will be pretty well tax exempt forever. And so you're not gonna have a say in it. It's bound by the Assessment Act. It's not permissibly exempted. And so what it's gonna have is a nominal fee, which will be $1, and of assessed value. And so basically that's tax exempt.
Well, that changed my mind. Because we do have a very limited tax base in this town. So, yeah, I had thought of that previously, but thank you for bringing that up.
And the reason I know this, just in case everyone's kind of wondering, is because when we were dealing with the, is it the Desert Sun Resource Integrated? That's where I researched this further, and then I was pointing them in that direction instead of coming to council for a permissive tax exemption. If you can fall within the parameters of the affordable housing section or the classification of assessed value, then you would become totally exempt. And I'm quite certain that this is where this development is going.
Interesting.
What was that again? Sorry.
If I'm not 100% sure, but I'm reasonably certain, because I believe there's 5 or 6 developments in Penticton right now that are classified as affordable housing. For example, that one down in Winnipeg, that's $1 assessed value.
I thought that, like, the Desert Sun didn't qualify, they looked at that exemption, but because it wasn't supportive housing, they didn't have any.
No, the Desert Sun, you're absolutely correct. I'm referring to this development here, that one that we're talking about tonight. Desert Sun wouldn't qualify.
No.
But this one, there's very good chance it will.
This one could.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it will.
Under legislation,
Mm-hmm.
under supportive housing, or?
Yes.
Okay. My question, before I, was just, I guess just some concern about that the minister was here, we talked about this project. Is this on life support, this project, needing this reduction in DCCs?
Thank you, Worship. I don't think so. I think this was a request that they made. They requested council waiving of the DCCs and some minor roadworks that possibly on the south side, they wanted to leave that unfinished at this time until a new phase was built. Ultimately, at this time, I prepared a report for council's consideration with the 50% reduction, which staff felt was, it's tough for Oliver, a smaller community, to take a $225,000 hit, right? Like some, even Penticton or Vernon. So what I told the applicants is that I would take to council a 50% reduction, and just to get your appetite on it, and then that would help, form the bylaw amendments. But no, I don't think it's on life support. I mean, their housing minister came here and made a big announcement with 3 different projects in the valley. So ultimately, it's up to council to approach it the way they feel best fit.
Thank you, Councilor Mattis.
That goes along with what I was going to say, is that this project is moving ahead whether council does this or not. And I don't think that the taxpayers of Oliver should be subsidizing this phase of the project down the road, we'll be subsidizing the housing quite heavily with the lack of taxes we'll be collecting on the building. I don't think we should be subsidizing developers at this point, by giving them a break on DCCs, especially when we don't know what we need in our DCC funds in order to complete the projects that we have in hand.
Councilor Grace.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just, through to the CFO, I just wanted to clarify, because my understanding of supportive housing is housing that has like healthcare workers on staff, mental health, like that's not what I think this is.
But I don't have the section of the Assessment Act with me and the interpretation, but there's multiple facets to what classifies as that class 3. But I do know of this type of either affordable housing or supportive housing. I haven't read all the staff report, I have to confess. But I do know of at least 5 facilities in Penticton that sound very similar to this, that are class 3 assessed value, and they're at $1.
So I guess to follow up then, if this development is going to be tax exempt, then I'm not in favor of reduction in DCCs, but I would like to revisit that before we get to the final here, which I would.
No actions required.
Well, I mean, for me, it depends on whether or not it's actually tax exempt or not. I don't know when we have that information.
I'm just saying at this moment, we're not, the resolution will be to change the bylaw to accommodate this request. And if we're not doing that, then no action is required.
I would
Bylaws
agree.
enforced.
I would agree that I don't think we should do any action at this time, especially with permissive tax being something we're not aware of. The town is still gonna review the tax exemption policy. And looking at whether we should be giving a tax exemption to affordable housing, a permissive tax exemption, I guess it is. But I would agree, at this point, I think it would be, we need more information before we could amend our own DCC bylaw to give this category of housing a cut in DCCs. Councilor Schwarzenberg.
Yeah, I agree. I think this project, if I recall, got $4.6 million from the government. That was the announcement when the minister came out. And if they indeed are going to have an assessed value of $1 and pay no taxes, I think if they can't build it in with those kind of benefits, then I don't think we can waive any of our DCC costs at this time. So I would move option 2, that council choose not to support the staff recommendation.
Have a seconder?
I'll second, but I do have a question. I guess I would like to know if they are going to be tax exempt and have that $1 assessed value. I don't know at what point, but if staff could bring that information to us once they have that, appreciate it.
That would be difficult to do because that's under the Assessment Act, and I don't have any power to do that. The assessors are the ones who make that call. I can certainly bring forward projects that I know that have already transpired in other jurisdictions like Penticton and compare it to this one, but like I said, I don't make that call. The assessment authority makes that call.
It would be in the Local Government Act, right around section 563, as reading today.
Just a
Michelle?
question to the CFO. At any point in time in the future, does council have the authorization to do it on their own and have a tax reduction? I mean, they decide to, can they make that decision on their own?
But
Well, instead of being forced to be, or because of the designation, can council do that on their own?
I don't quite follow you, but I'll try to maybe rephrase it. Within an assessment, the assessor will go out and they'll review the purpose of that building, the various aspects of the building, the supportive housing component, they cook their own meals, the low rent, things like that, and then how it was built and under which, like with the BC housing support, etc., that'll give that qualification. I know we have a staff member actually who works downstairs with me, her husband is an assessor, and I could certainly pose that question to him, but like it's very early preliminary, they wouldn't be reviewing that building until they're probably closer to 2/3 to 75% complete.
Any further discussion, questions? I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Councilor Michelle, anything to report this evening?
No, your worship.
Councilor Sadhu, anything to report? Okay. I'll move on to development permit, variance permits. Item 1, development variance permit, 5717 Sawmill Road. Pass it off to the CPO.
Thank you, Your Worship. I will pass this over to Mr. Hull, our Director of Development Services, to take you through this variance application.
Thank you, Your Worship. This application is for a development variance permit at 5717 Sawmill Road. This application is seeking a variance to increase the land area that accessory buildings and structures and carriage homes may collectively or individually occupy from 90 meters squared to 145 meters squared for the purpose of construction of an addition to a garage located at 5717 Sawmill Road, legally known as Lot A, District Lot 2450S, SDYD Plan KEP 59613. So on the screen there's a map showing the subject property. It's in the far southeast corner of the town, close to the Area C boundary. The zoning is RS1, Residential Low Density 1. The OCP designation is LR, Low Density Residential. They're proposing to construct a 60 square meter addition to a garage on the subject property that will be used as a hobby room with a small bathroom. Section 6.9.4 of Zoning Bylaw 1380 states that accessory buildings and structures and carriage homes shall not collectively or individually occupy in excess of 90 meters squared of land area. Since the proposed garage addition will result in accessory buildings on the property occupying a total of 143.3 square meters, a variance is required. On the screen there shows the site plan. So you'll see that the proposed addition is off the back, the eastern half of the existing garage. And a site plan with the design. So you see the existing garage there, 672 square feet, with the proposed hobby room of 644 square feet. There's also an existing pump shed which is included in that calculation because it's all accessory buildings. So the total of all of those in the RS1 zone is not to be greater than 90 square meters, but in this case it will be. It'll be 143.3 square meters, hence the requirement for the variance. So photos of the subject property. On the left is the street elevation from Sawmill Road. So there is the single family dwelling and the garage. The addition would be on the other side, so on the east side of this garage. And on the right is just a picture showing the garage as well. So on the left is a view that shows the addition area there. And on the right is looking north. So you'll see actually this is the neighboring property. That's their garage there. So it's not their home. That's close to this proposed addition. And then lastly is the east elevation showing the proposed addition location. So as mentioned, the floor plan, there is a little breezeway and then the heated hobby shop with a small bathroom in the corner there. And the elevation, so the south elevation shows it's a modest 1-story addition. And then on the right, the north elevation, so that's the view from the neighbors, so there won't be any windows or anything facing the neighbors, so no impact to privacy. And a 3D rendering showing the proposed addition. So some staff comments are that the proposed addition is a modest 1-story structure that's hidden behind the existing garage and hardly visible from the street. The appearance of the property from the street will essentially remain unchanged. The total lot coverage of 11.3% is far less than the 40% permitted in the RS1 zone. This helps to reduce any concerns of visual crowdedness that may arise from approval of the variance request. And the addition is more than 3 meters from the north property line, with no windows facing the neighboring property. Furthermore, the dwelling on the property to the north is a significant distance from the proposed garage, with their own garage acting as an additional buffer from the proposed addition. This helps to reduce any privacy concerns. The 3 options for council are that council may choose to support the staff recommendation, council may choose not to support the staff recommendation, or council may choose to refer back to staff for additional information. And with that, the staff recommendation is that council approve development variance permit 2019-29, and that staff be directed to issue the permit. Thank you.
Councilor Matt.
Thank you, Your Worship. Questions through the staff. I notice on the floor plans that there's a full bath being proposed inside the garage, and it concerns me that no longer a garage, it's on the edge of being a carriage house or in-law suite or whatever you want to call it. And I don't know that all of the things are being done to meet that criteria. And as long as that bath is there, there is no way that we can have any control over whether it in fact does become a secondary suite rather than a heated hobby shop. And is there anything we can do to prevent it from becoming a secondary suite?
Thank you, Your Worship. Well, I mean, you could put a covenant or something on it saying that, or make it a condition possibly of the permit. But ultimately it is just an addition with a bathroom. There's no bedrooms, there's no plumbing for a sink or there's no plug, there won't be a 220 plug for a stove. So, I mean, it is just an addition to a garage, but yeah, I mean, ultimately that could happen, right? But
You talked that there is no 220 plug, there is no provision for a sink, and it doesn't show any of that on the plan.
yeah.
Do we have any way of preventing that from happening? So they could actually build all of those things there. It would be easy enough to add in plumbing for a kitchen sink to the existing plumbing as it's drawn on the picture. And put in a 220 plug and they have a suite. It concerns me. I have no issue with the addition and the oversize. I have an issue with what's proposed in the actual plan itself. And I don't know how we prevent that from becoming a suite.
Councilor Schwarzenegger.
Thank you, Worship. Through to the Director of Development Services. Are carriage houses not allowed in RS1 zone?
Thank you, Your Worship. No, carriage houses are permitted. The applicants have not expressed that they wanted to build a carriage house at this time.
Right.
It's
but
just
if
a
they-
hobby shop, so.
Right, but if they did want it converted, that's not against the zoning down the
No.
road.
No, it wouldn't be. There would be some work involved to convert it.
Right.
It is built as a heated hobby shop, so that may make it easier. But yeah, I mean, ultimately these things can happen, right? When someone builds a house and they have a wet bar in the basement, I mean, there's got to be some level of
Becomes a
trust,
suite.
right? Like you go in there and you inspect it and you make sure it doesn't happen. But ultimately these things could happen, right? But I don't think it's appropriate to necessarily put a covenant or do anything like, that means at this stage. Ultimately, the application before council is for an increase in the size. It's not to allow this use, because both uses would be permitted, the hobby room or a carriage house.
Thank you. Councilor Grace.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through to the Director of Development Services. I was just gonna ask, is that a bathtub or a shower?
It's a shower.
Yeah, there is a shower in the proposed plans. I mean, the applicant is here if the applicant wants to speak a little bit more to their intention, if that gives council some comfort, if you want to do that and speak to possibly the shower component of it. I think she is here if council allows her to speak to it, if she wishes.
I'm fine.
I don't think I need anything from the applicant. Councilor Schwarzenegger.
So I will move the recommendation that council approve development variance permit 2019-029 and that staff be directed to issue the permit.
Seconded by Councilor Grace. Councilor Mattis.
On the basis, as the Director of Development Services said, that it's that this application is strictly for a change in size, nothing more, I will have no problem supporting.
I would agree. Any other comments, questions? I'll call the question then. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Moving to, where are we here? Item 2, temporary use permit, 5829 Sawmill Road.
Thank you, Your Worship. I will pass this over to Mr. Hole to take you through this application.
Thank you, Your Worship. This application is for a temporary use permit, number 2019-23 for 5829 Sawmill Road. This application is seeking a 2-year temporary use permit to operate an animal shelter at 5829 Sawmill Road, legally known as Lot 1, District Lot 2450S, SDYD Plan 4933. The property location map is actually quite close to the previous application in the southeast corner of the town. It's in an area with some residential uses, but surrounded by industrial uses. Some photos of the subject property. On the left is the south elevation from Walnut Place, and the photo on the right is the west elevation from Sawmill Road. And the photo there is looking from the south, which shows the west portion of the property, which is the cattery. So the zoning map, as mentioned, is RS1, residential low density 1, and it's surrounded by the industrial uses. The OCP is LR, low density residential. So as mentioned, the applicant is proposing to utilize existing structures on the property to operate an animal shelter. Given that an animal shelter is not a permitted use in the RS1 zone, a temporary use permit is required. So the site plan, it shows the cattery on the left, the grooming salon. I should point out actually at this stage that the applicant has been operating a grooming salon under a business license for the past 10 years. On the right is the dog kennel and the run, and the private entrance is on the south side of the property there. Some of the OCP guidelines to do with temporary use permits. As per section 22.1, the objective of a temporary use permit is to avoid conflicts between different types of uses, residential, commercial, and agricultural uses. So the subject property has been operating an animal grooming business for the past decade, and more recently, an animal rescue operation with no complaints from immediate neighbors. There are no single-family dwellings directly bordering the subject property, and the use will primarily occur within buildings, thus decreasing the likelihood of conflicts between different types of uses. The guidelines also state, provide for temporary approval of transitional uses or uses where uncertainty exists respecting appropriateness or viability of the use, and where it is premature to decide rezoning and long-term land use patterns. So staff are recommending a temporary use permit rather than a site-specific zoning amendment to ensure that the use continues to be a good fit for the neighborhood over the next 2 years, prior to establishing a permanent long-term use, which would be through a site-specific zoning amendment. The options for council is that council may support the staff recommendation, they may choose not to support the staff recommendation, or they may choose to refer it back to staff for additional information. And with that, the staff recommendation is that council approve temporary use permit 2019-23 and that staff be directed to issue the permit. Thank you.
Comments, questions, council?
I'm good.
Councilor Grace?
Thank you, Your Worship. I just comment that I've never seen such a profound community response to a request before. I think the need for this service has been proven and is well supported by the residents of Alford. So I would be in support of the request.
Councilor Madden?
Question through to the development services. Is there anything that that controls the length of time the animals would be at the shelter? Could they potentially have permanent residency?
Thank you to the chair. No, there would be nothing that would determine that. I mean, the best way would be the permitted use is an animal rescue, right? So, I mean, you look at the definition of an animal rescue. I have to find it in the dictionary, but but I mean that it's a rescue, right? So you're rescuing animals. I don't know what the appropriate time would be for that, but obviously if it continued, beyond a week or beyond a few days, then there would be concerns, right?
how do we address those concerns?
Well, then it would be an infraction to the zoning bylaw, right? So it would be bylaw enforcement through the zoning bylaw. Given that it's not actually operating as a rescue anymore, if animals are living there long-term. And the animal control bylaw currently has a maximum of 2 dogs and 2 cats per residence. So if it's found, from visiting the property on multiple occasions, the same dogs and the same cats are there over a longer period of time, then it would be a concern. I mean, council also has the ability to put conditions on a temporary use permit if there is some hesitancy in that matter.
So we've applied for a temporary use permit as to operate an animal shelter. Do we have any definitions for animal shelter in any of our bylaws?
No, not at this time. I mean, you don't necessarily have to define a use. There are plenty of zoning bylaws that have definitions, and the fallback would be the Webster dictionary definition, which, I mean, I could get that for you if you need it. Thanks.
Councillor Schwarzenberger?
Thank you, Worship. I agree with Councillor Bryce. I think it's obviously a needed service in our town. There's lots of people who have signed a petition in favor of it, and it is in an area. There are some single-family homes across the street, but the lot itself is kind of surrounded by industrial, so I think it would have a minimal impact, a more minimal impact in that location than just about anywhere else in town. So I think I'd be in favor of giving them the 2-year temporary use permit.
Thank you, Your Worship. To make it official, then I'll move that council approve the temporary use permit 2019-23, and that staff be directed to issue the permit.
I'll say.
Second, by Councillor Schwarzenberg. I guess my only concern is just that we have a way to deal with the subject property if after a year it's not working, and we have bylaws in place and we're able to, because we don't have a definition of it, I'm not sure what kind of bylaws we're gonna be able to lean on. Is there an option to do less than 2 years, like to do a year, or where did 2 years come from?
Ultimately, typically temporary use permits are for 3 years.
Okay.
Yeah, so staff's opinion that, 3 years is a bit much, but 2 years seemed a bit more appropriate. I mean, the fact is too, is that the use has been occurring on this property for a few years, is our understanding. And there has not been any bylaw complaints. So this was brought to staff's attention, so that's why the application is here, to formalize it and to legalize it. But I mean, it's staff's opinion that this property owner is very responsible and, has clearly demonstrated support from the community and surrounding neighbors. So staff don't see it as a concern moving forward. And in 2 years, if the applicant may move on to a different location, or they may apply for a more permanent zoning amendment, which like you said, it's a temporary use permit would give us time. Like you said, if it's not working out in a year, well, then there's only a year left, right? And we can sort of work through that.
So Mattis?
How was it brought to staff's attention?
It was brought to staff's attention through a complaint, not from the surrounding neighbors.
CEO?
Thank you, Worship. My understanding is that the person that was, that brought it to our attention was not within the town.
They live, in the rural area.
Thank you. Any further comments, questions? I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Moving to bylaws, 2020 Sewer Rates Amendment Bylaw. Pass this over CAO.
Thank you, Your Worship. I will pass this over to Mr. Leahy to bring through that.
Thank you, Your Worship. The, what you have before you is the Sewer Rate Amendment Bylaw. On December 13th, the Council adopted the 2020 to 2024 sewer operating and capital budgets as amended. There were two minor amendments, one minor amendment, the other was just moving, consolidating two reserve transfers into one reserve, but the one minor amendment was the Rockcliffe lift station pump, $12,000 moved from operations to capital. The budget is indicated was a 2% increase in the rates for all rates effective January 1 to 2020. And as such, staff are recommending that Sewer Amendment Bylaw 1331.06 be read a first, second, and third time. Thank you, Your Worship.
Councillor Madison.
Thank you, Your Worship. I will move that Sewer Amendment Bylaw 1331.06 be read a first, second, and third time.
Second, Councillor Schwarzenberger. Any further discussion? Call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Item 2, Official Community Plan Amendment Bylaw 1370.02 and Zoning Amendment Bylaw 1380.1 Vacation Rentals for adoption. Pass this to the CAO.
Thank you, Your Worship. As you mentioned, both of these bylaws have gone through are up for adoption. They have gone through the public hearing, third reading, and we've also received approval from the Ministry of Transportation and Highways, so they are ready to be adopted now.
Councillor Grace.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll move that official community plan amendment bylaw 1370.02 and zoning amendment bylaw 1380.10 be adopted.
Second, Councillor Madison. Further discussion? Call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Moving to item 3, Zoning Bylaw Amendment 1380.11 312 Chardonnay Avenue for adoption. Pass this to the CEO.
Thank you, Your Worship. Again, this has gone through public hearing and third reading. Approval from the Ministry of Transportation was received. And this is for a property up on Chardonnay that is being it's being down zoned from residential high density 1 to residential low density 4.
Councillor Grace.
I'll move that zoning bylaw amendment 1380.11 be adopted.
Second.
Second, Councillor Schwarzenberger. Further discussion? Call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Moving to business, Oliver Tourism Funding Model. Pass this to the CEO.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm going to pass this over to the corporate officer. This was with respect to the inter-council meeting that was had last week, I do believe. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. As the CAO mentioned, this report is before council to formalize the discussion that occurred on November 18th. As a background, council met with representatives from the RUS and Electoral Area C Director to discuss the OTA agreement. There was general consensus that the funding requisition amount of $56,000 for Oliver Tourism would be funded through the regional district bylaw, and that the MRDT application cost would be split equally between the two local governments, $7,500 each. Funding for the Oliver Tourism through the requisition is through the Economic Development Extended Service Establishment Bylaw 1978-2000, and the bylaw is attached for your information. The overall scope of the service for OTA remains the same that is outlined in the current agreement. There are a couple of options before council to support the resolution, or you may wish to refer back to staff for additional information. If you'd like, I can read the recommendation, or if you have any questions, I can answer that.
Question, comments, Council? Councillor Madison.
The only comment I would make, Your Worship, is to thank Director Knodel for being so forthcoming in sharing these costs with us and lowering the cost to the taxpayers of town.
Amen.
certainly not gonna argue against that.
My only question would be just about approving the, splitting the grant and a grant of 15,000. Are we able to do that now, or does that happen at our budget time? Discussions?
It is usually through the budget time that you, do approve the costs that you're going to share in.
Councilor Mattis?
This resolution would basically be giving direction to staff to make sure that that's included in the budget discussions.
Okay. That's good then. Councilor Grice?
I'll move the proposed motion as written.
I will second the proposed motion as written.
Don't worry.
Are there
No.
any questions? Comments? None? Call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Item 2, joint grant with RDOS, Indigenous Cultural Safety and Cultural Humility Training. I'll refer to, pass this off to the CAO.
And I'll refer this over to the corporate officer as she looks after these types of things.
Thank you, Your Worship. The request came through the regional district to consider making an application with the regional district for, it's through the Community Safety Preparedness Grant option, I believe. Indigenous Culture, Safety and Cultural Humility Training. Just as a little bit of a background, this funding stream that is offered through UBCM is to support and provide training for emergency management personnel with cultural safety and humility training with respects to our First Nations peoples. It helps us to effectively partner and provide assistance to our neighboring communities during times of emergency. So if the regional district makes an application, it could be a joint application which could ultimately increase the amount of the grant, but it's at no cost to the town of Oliver. It's 100% funding. Council could choose to submit a single grant application, which would be an amount of $25,000. Those are the two options. The recommendation before council is to participate in a joint application with the RDOS for the UBCM Indigenous Cultural Safety and Cultural Humility Training Program, and that council supports the regional district to apply for, receive, and manage the grant funding on the town of Oliver's behalf as a regional grant application.
Thank you. Comments, questions, Council? Councilor Mattis?
I will move the recommendation as written.
As written. Do I have a second here? As written.
As written.
Councilor Grice, any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Moving to correspondence. I will pass this off to the CAO.
Thank you, Your Worship. For council's action required on the November 25th correspondence report, there's one piece of correspondence from Mayor Helps from the City of Victoria. She's seeking council's support to communicate with the provincial government with regards to their two UBCM resolutions that were not able to reach debate at the conference as the session time had elapsed. The resolutions are with regards to safer drug supply to save lives, and number 2, observed inhalation sites for overdose prevention. The two resolutions are included with the correspondence report this evening. The options are that council may wish to support, to share support with the provincial government on the two resolutions, or either of the resolutions, or council may wish to receive and file.
Councilor Grice.
Thank you, Worship. So this year, council recognized International Opioid Overdose Awareness Day, and I think support of these resolutions aligns with that. So I would move that council write a letter of support
For both resolutions?
I would say for both resolutions, yes. The corporate officer wants to wordsmith that for me.
a second motion. Anything we can do will help.
Any further discussion?
It's not share support.
I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Item K2, correspondence dated November 8th, 2019 from Minister Selena Robinson outlining Town of Oliver 2019 grant in lieu of property tax payment. Move to receive
That in the weekly.
and the weekly.
So moved.
So moved. Call the question. Those in favor? Motion is carried. Council reports, Councilor Schwarzenberger.
Thank you, Your Worship. Wednesday, November 11th, I attended the special open meeting with regards to Parks and Rec governance and Oliver tourism. Later that day, I also attended the sewer and water budget meetings with all of council. Monday, November 18th was our meeting with the RDOS, again on Parks and Rec governance and Oliver tourism funding. And later that day, I attended a Parks and Rec meeting with Councillor Grice. And Friday, the 22nd, I attended some of the Christmas light-up events. I must say that the fireworks display was fabulous, and so were the lights. So it was a great event, and we had lots of participation from the citizens of Oliver, so that was wonderful. And that's all I got for you.
Thank you, Councilor Schwarzenberger. Councilor Mass.
Thank you, Your Worship. On the 13th, I attended all of the meetings with Councilor Schwarzenberger. And on the 18th, we attended the joint meeting with the RUS. And on the 20th, the Okanagan Regional Library Board had a meeting at Macomb.
Thank you, Councilor Mattis. Councilor Grace.
Thank you, Worship. Wednesday, November 13th, also attended the OPRS fee-for-service agreement meeting and the sewer and water budget deliberations meeting. Sunday, November 17th, I attended the OSNS 40th anniversary Share a Smile telethon at Cherry Lane Mall in Penticton. Monday, November 18th, the OPRS governance inter-council discussion with the members of the RDOS. Later that day, took part in a conference call with Melissa Hempel, who's the food security coordinator for the city of Revelstoke. So I had some discussions about presenting a business case for our food secure committee to council. Then later that evening, Parks and Rec Society had my first meeting as the new council appointee. Tuesday, November 19th, met with the CAO and a teacher from the high school, Graham Berg, to discuss youth council. So he's identified some students who may be interested. I was hoping to see some of them here tonight, but we'll get them eventually. So just talk about some challenges and opportunities, some other teachers in and outside of the SOSS, and just the importance of youth having a role in the shaping of the priorities of council. So looking forward to continuing that conversation. Friday, November 22nd, had a meeting at the Division of Family Practice in Penticton to discuss the primary care network, and later that evening also attended the Oliver Town Lineup festivities, and took a lot of work by local volunteers to make that event happen, so kudos to them. Saturday, November 23rd was the Desert Valley Hospice Society celebration of Caring Hands fundraiser, and Sunday, November 24th was our beloved Holly Jolly Oliver, our community Christmas concert. And that is the end of my report.
Thank you, Councilor Grace. November 14th, I attended RDOS Strategic Planning in Penticton. On the November 18th, I was at the Oliver Parks and Recreation Governance discussion. On November 19th, I attended the Rotary meeting and provided a presentation on the Community Safety and Crime Prevention Committee. On November 21st, I had a meeting with the CEO of Fat Creek Winery and a tour of the place. That's quite the facility. November 22nd, primary care community workshop in Penticton, and I attended the Oliver Christmas light up as well. November 23rd, Desert Valley Hospice annual fundraiser at Frank Venables Theater, and on Sunday I was at the Holly Jolly concert as well, and definitely kudos out to Councilor Grice who put a heck of a performance together. And hopefully this is good news, but the new infrastructure minister is Catherine McKenna. And so I've been talking with Richard Canning, and he is trying to put together a meeting with her, and if there's anyone that knows this area, she's probably the one, with her being the environment minister and her work in the area as far as the park goes. So at least we don't have to convince somebody that's never been here before, doesn't know where the South Okanagan is. She knows it very well, has a relationship with the Osoyoos Indian Band. So also been talking to Clarence about being part of that meeting, so fingers crossed, maybe something will come out of it. But I think that is very good news that we have a new infrastructure minister, and it's somebody that knows this area. Next upcoming meeting is Monday, December 9th, 2019, and acting mayor schedule. Councillor Ventimiglia has a couple days left in November, and then December, January, and February, it's Councillor Schwarzenberger. Public for questions? We'll look for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Seconded. We're adjourned.